Hello everyone. This is Ken Honda speaking. Today, I'd like to introduce the presentation of Professor Sawada Kenichi, a famous researcher of the Jomon period given in June 2024. This presentation is divided into two parts. In the first half, Mr. Sawada talks about what the Ainu people is. He claims that the Ainu are modern-day Jomon people and are a Japanese ethnic group that has inherited the culture of the Jomon period to the present day with various evidences. In the second half, he expresses that the Japanese must be wary of Russia's claim that the Ainu are the indigenous people of Japan and part of the Russian people, so Russia has the right to occupy and govern Hokkaido. To understand this second half, it would need to know the history of relationship between Japan and Russia. Let me briefly explain the history of Japan and Russia. Japan has ever fought two major battles with Russia. The first was the Russo-Japanese War. This was a war from February 1904 to September 1905. Japan fought with Russia on the Chinese mainland and in the Sea of Japan, and was victorious. The peace conference for the Russo-Japanese War was held in Portsmouth, USA in 1905. In this peace treaty, both countries signed the Treaty of Portsmouth, which allowed Japan to force Russia to abandon its territorial ambitions on the Korean peninsula and to gain the southern half of Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands as Japanese territory. Sakhalin is called as Karafuto and Kuril Islands as Tsushima-Rettu in Japanese. The green parts of this map are Russian territory, and the red parts are Japanese territory. You can see that Japan's territory has increased in the 1905 map compared to 1875. This was the price paid for the deaths of 85,000 Japanese soldiers. During World War II, Japan and the Soviet Union signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Treaty in 1941, and Russia and Japan were in a position not to go to war. However, the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union met at the Yalta Conference in February 1945 to discuss what to do with the world after World War II, and concluded a secret agreement. At this conference, U.S. President Roosevelt urged the Soviet Union to enter the war against Japan. The secret agreement of the Yalta Conference stipulated the following. 1. The Soviet Union would enter the war against Japan 2 or 3 months after Germany's surrender. 2. The southern part of Sakhalin would be returned to the Soviet Union. 3. The Kuril Islands would be handed over to the Soviet Union. 4. Other. The Japanese government foolishly trusted the Soviet Union and tried to ask them to mediate a ceasefire with the US and Britain. As they were unaware of the secret agreement at the Yalta Conference, the ceasefire naturally did not materialize. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and on August 14, 1945, Japan notified the Allied powers that it would accept the Potsdam Declaration, and on September 2 of the same year, Japan signed the document of surrender to the US, bringing the Pacific War to an end at this point. On August 9, 1945, the Soviet Army mobilized 1.5 million troops and invaded Manchuria, which was then Japan's sphere of influence, and took control of both Manchuria and the northern part of the Korean peninsula. The Soviets intended to occupy southern Sakhalin, then occupy the Kuril Islands from the north, and then the northern half of Hokkaido. On August 16, after Japan announced its acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, the Soviet Army further invaded southern Sakhalin, and began its operations against the Kuril Islands from the Kamchatka Peninsula, landing on Shumashu Island. The Japanese troops on Shumashu Island were in the process of disarming. By 4 p.m. on August 18, the Japanese Imperial Headquarters had ordered all units to cease fighting, except for unavoidable self-operated actions, so the garrison on Shumishu Island would launch a counterattack against the Soviet forces. The Soviet army landed on Shumishu Island in the early hours of August 18, and a 4-day battle until the 21st began. The Japanese army gathered over 80 large and small artillery pieces and 85 tanks on the beach where the Soviet army landed. They then attacked the Soviet army, who were having difficulty landing due to thick fog. The Japanese Army HQ ordered the garrison to cease fighting at 4 p.m. on the 18th, and attempted to negotiate a ceasefire with the Soviet army. However, while the garrison relaxed their attacks at this time, the Soviet army continued their attacks, so the actual fighting continued. The Soviet side had no intention of a ceasefire. The Japanese army contacted General MacArthur, Supreme Commander of the Allied powers, through the Imperial Headquarters and protested the Soviet army's unjust invasion. However, the Soviet army ignored it. The ceasefire negotiations were not very fruitful, and sporadic fighting continued. The Japanese army was superior throughout, but in accordance with the ceasefire order from the central government, they ceased fighting on the 21st and agreed to disarm on the 23rd. According to the official records of both Japan and the Soviet Union, the number of Japanese casualties in the Battle of Shumishu ranged from 600 to 1,000. The number of Soviet casualties ranged from 1,500 to 4,000. The Soviet leadership decided to adopt a cautious strategy against Japan after facing fierce resistance from the Japanese army in the Battle of Shumishu. So, the Soviet army occupied the Kuril Islands one by one as they reached them. However, while the Soviet invasion was delayed, the U.S. military entered Hokkaido, and the Soviet Union was unable to land there. If the Japanese soldiers had not resisted the Soviet invasion, Japan would not be what it is today. The Japanese have been a peaceful nation for 80 years since World War II, and have never fought a war with a foreign country. For this reason, they have come to dream of Japan fighting a war again. However, in February 2022, Russia suddenly began attacking Ukraine, claiming to protect Russians in Ukraine. Many Japanese people were shocked to learn of this. This is because the Japanese people have not forgotten that after World War II, Russia suddenly invaded Japanese territory, ignoring the Japan-Soviet Neutrality Pact, and has continued to unjustly occupy Japanese territory ever since. Mr. Sawada is warning Japanese politicians and the public that Hokkaido must not become a second Ukraine. Sawada's appeal is well-founded.
It may be the first time for some of you to meet me. My name is Kenichi Sawada, came from Hokkaido, where I established and manage Jomon Ainu Research Group. Thank you for joining us today. Some of you attending this seminar for the first time may be wondering how Jomon is connected to Ainu. So I would like to start this presentation from explaining this point. If I am to give the conclusion, the Ainu are Jomon people living in the present day. Let me explain with an example. During the Jomon period, Japanese people wore a cloth called angin in Japanese. Angin is a technique in which fabric is made by knitting threads together. However, during the Yayoi period, a weaving method called flat weaving became widespread. It is soft to touch and easy to weave. As a result, angin disappeared from all over Japan. However, modern Ainu can still knit angin. In other words, they still have the technology, culture of the Jomon period. I'll show you another example. During the Jomon period, people lived in pit dwellings called Tateyana Jukyo. They had buried dead babies in jars at the entrance to their dwellings. This means that anyone passing through the entrance would have stepped on a dead baby, or rather a child. Why Jomon people did such a reckless thing? None of the archaeologists have been able to figure out the reason. However, the same culture has remained among the Ainu. What's more, the Ainu people understand what it means. Why did they do such a thing? To put it bluntly, they believed in reincarnation. Their theology is that humans are dead ancestors who return from faraway places and are reborn. If a dead child comes all the way from faraway places and dies soon after, it has to go back to a faraway place again. This would be an insult to their ancestors. So they buried the baby in the most crowded place, hoping the baby would enter her womb and be born as the next baby when a woman becomes pregnant again. With this thought in mind, they buried the baby under the ground at the entrance to their dwellings. In this way, the Ainu have not only inherited the customs of the Jomon people, but they have also properly inherited their metaphysics. Let me explain with another example. There is a book called Fudoki. This book was created in 713 AD and contains information about the geography and industries of various parts of Japan. In the Kyushu section of the Fudoki, it says that shore is called Hijiha, but that no one knows why it is called that way anymore. This shows that by the time the Fudoki was written, the meaning of the old place name, in other words the Jomon place name, had already been forgotten. Hijiha is apparently pronounced something like Pitipa in modern pronunciation, but in modern Ainu the sound means shore. This means that we today can understand the meaning of words used by the Jomon people in the Jomon period as Ainu language. Ainu place names remain even today in Okinawa, Hachijo Island, and the southern islands in Japan. However, there is no way that the Ainu in Hokkaido could have gone there and named the places. There is no way that something so absurd could happen. In other words, place names that were called in the Jomon language can be understood in modern Ainu language. All these examples will lead us to think that Ainu is a language that has retained the language of Jomon people almost exactly as it was. There are comparative linguists who have restored ancient words, but if we go back to the time of Murasaki Shikibu, the novelist who wrote the world's first story in the 10th century, their spoken language is no longer understandable to modern people. If we listen to a restored spoken language of the Yayoi period, we modern people who do not know Ainu can only hear it as Ainu. The pronunciation at Yayoi period has changed completely different from modern Japanese. If you go back further and further in Japanese, it becomes closer to modern Ainu. I think that if you go back to the Jomon period, Japanese will probably be almost the same as Ainu. Therefore, we can say that Ainu are Jomon people living in the present day. That is why I established and lead the Jomon Ainu Research Society. Let me summarize what I said in the last seminar. For detail, please refer the previous presentation. The Jomon people built the 3 Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. The Jomon people also created the Sumerian civilization. For detail, please refer the previous presentation. Most people would wonder why Jomon people would go to such places and establish such civilizations. I would like to answer this question. To begin with, the technology of US Homo sapiens, so-called new humans, dates back to the late Paleolithic period. It is noteworthy that almost all late Paleolithic ruins are found only on the Japanese archipelago. The only people who had culture and technology during the late Paleolithic period were the Jomon people in Japanese archipelago. China has such a large territory, but there are almost no late Paleolithic ruins there, close to zero. Europe has famous murals such as Lascaux and Altamira, but there are only around 300 of them at most. The Korean peninsula has only a maximum of 100 ruins. In comparison, Japanese archipelago has as many as 17,000 late Paleolithic ruins. It's an overwhelming number. If you ask what is found in ruins in Korea, Siberia, and Europe, you will find polished stones. And at that time, the only ethnic group that could polish and drill holes in stone were the Jomon people. This means that whether they are Siberian or European ruins, the only people who left them could be the Jomon people who came from the Japanese archipelago. Polished stone tools have been excavated in the Japanese archipelago dating back 38,000 years. They are called blade-polished stone tools, and many of these have been excavated from all over Japan. In other words, the Japanese archipelago has essentially entered the Neolithic period since 38,000 years ago. Accordingly, Europe began using polished stone tools to polish stone no more than 10,000 years ago. This means that Japanese technology and culture are 28,000 years ahead of Europe. About 2,000 years of history have passed since the birth of Jesus Christ, and it took 14 repeats of that history for Europe to finally catch up with Japan. If you hear that, you will probably think, oh, maybe it really was the Jomon people who created that ancient civilization. Please discard the common sense you have been taught and correctly understand ancient history based on the facts. Thank you. I am talking about the technological and cultural origins of the ancient world, such as the Jomon, the Ainu, and world civilizations. However, today I would also like to talk about modern times and more political issues. I refer the handout document. It says, if the Ainu issue is left unchecked, Hokkaido will become a second Ukraine. Let me talk along with the document. Look at the part that says, first, it says the following. Russian President Putin claims that the Ainu are a northern ethnic group of Russian descent and has officially made clear his intention to intervene in foreign countries and support Russian residents. And it has been reported that Russia was actually planning to intervene militarily in Hokkaido before invading Ukraine. The foreign countries he is talking about is Japan, and the Russian residents are Ainu. The fact that such reports exist means that Putin's intention isn't real. It is dangerous to underestimate Russia. So let me tell you about the details. The scientific truth that the Ainu are not a different indigenous people, but a Japanese ethnic group. In May 2019, a joint research group including National Museum of Nature and Science, National Institute of Genetics, University of Tokyo, and Kanazawa University made a major announcement that Ainu have inherited 70% of the DNA of Jomon people. This is the scientific truth. What this means is that the Ainu are undoubtedly the descendants of Jomon people who have been living in Hokkaido in Japan since at least the Jomon period. And the claim that the Ainu are a northern ethnic group that came to Hokkaido after the Middle Ages is completely false. Furthermore, in August 2020, University of Tokyo Graduate School, and Kanazawa University published a study titled The History of Humanity in East Eurasia, revealed by the analysis of the Jomon genome. The research content clearly states the following. Genetic element IK002, extracted from a Jomon human bone from Aichi Prefecture, Honshu, was included in the Ainu cluster. These results are consistent with the whole genome analysis of the Jomon people in Hokkaido, and indicate that the Ainu are the oldest lineage of inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago, and are likely one of the direct descendants of the founding population of East Eurasians. Moreover, this announcement clearly states that the genome of Jomon people, IK002, is an ancient lineage that can be said to be the root of East Eurasians, belongs to the southern root, and has been hardly influenced by the northern root. This means that the Jomon people, including those who would later be called Ainu, are people who arrived on the Japanese archipelago via Okinawa and other islands of the southern route. This fact means that the claim made by Japanese archaeologists and others that the Ainu are a northern people has been scientifically refuted. These scientific truths tell us that, 1. The Ainu are the descendants of Jomon people in Japan who have been living in Hokkaido since the Jomon period. 2. Moreover, they are not a northern people. 3. They are people who migrated to Japanese archipelago via the southern route. 4. Furthermore, it is highly likely that the Jomon group, who advanced into the continent, became the founding group of East Eurasians. We are the ancestor group. The Japanese people of the Age of the Gods went to East Asia and created the countries of East Eurasia. We are the ancestor group. This is becoming clear through DNA analysis. What kind of movements are there in Japan and Russia in response to this? Please see the section on Russian movements, Putin's claims, and domestic left-wing forces responding to them. However, in Russia, they have made unscientific claims without taking these facts into consideration at all. They are still doing so today. In December 2018, Russian President Putin expressed his intention to recognize the Ainu people as Russia's indigenous people. Hokkaido Shimbun Morning Edition, December 19th. Furthermore, following Putin's orders, Deputy Speaker of the Russian State Duma Sergei Mironov stated, according to some experts, Russia has all rights to Hokkaido in April 2022. Jiji.com report on the 9th. In addition, political scientist Sergei Chernyakovsky claimed that Tokyo, the Japanese government, is improperly holding Hokkaido, which was politically Russian territory. Regnum news agency report in April 2020. He also said that as Russia's claim in the 1855 Japan-Russia Treaty of Peace and Amity, the Ainu people lived in Hokkaido. They are the same ethnic group that lives in Sakhalin, Karafuto, near Vladivostok, and in the southern part of Kamchatka, and are one of the Russian ethnic groups. JCast News report on April 7, 2022. Play. Simply saying, Russia has been claiming since the end of the Edo period that the Ainu are Russian people. They have always maintained that Hokkaido is Russian territory because the Ainu live in Hokkaido. Russia has not changed, ever since the old days. And in September 2022, Russia approved the new diplomatic policy of Russian world, as President Putin stated at the beginning, and officially codified the act of intervening in foreign countries to support Russian residents. Newsweek, September 6, 2022. Furthermore, before invading Ukraine, Russia was actually planning to intervene militarily in Hokkaido. Newsweek, November 25, 2022. This is an American report, but you should not underestimate American information, and you should not underestimate Russia too. It is true that the report was made that such a plan actually existed. And as for the Russian world, this seems to be Russian law. In other words, under Russian domestic law, it is already legal to invade Hokkaido. This Russian law does not use the word invasion. Instead, they use the word intervention. But under Russian domestic law, it is legal to intervene in Hokkaido. Please understand that Japan is in this dangerous situation. To make matters worse, the domestic left in Japan is lobbying President Putin as if to fulfill Russia's ambitions. In January 2019, an organization calling itself the Mosirikoru Kamui Association, Representative Satoshi Hatayama, Vice Representative Pompei Ishii, submitted a request to President Vladimir Putin. In this request, they request President Putin to consider the integrated conservation and management of the Kuril Islands with Hokkaido Island, in addition to making the Kuril Islands an Ainu autonomous region, district. In this request, they call the Chieshima Islands the Russian name for the Kuril Islands, and the Shiratoko Peninsula Hokkaido Island. The reason they deliberately call Hokkaido an island is to flatter Russia by saying that Hokkaido is an island that is part of Russia. This is like offering Hokkaido to Putin. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that foreign powers and the Japanese left are doing this, but in fact, neither the Japanese government nor conservative politicians are doing anything wrong. Next, I will explain how the mistaken understanding of the Ainu by Japanese conservative commentators and the Japanese government is making the crisis decisive. Unfortunately, this so-called Ainu northern ethnic group theory is not just an assertion made by Russia or the Japanese left. There are many domestic conservative commentators who believe that the Ainu are a northern ethnic group. They are convinced that the Ainu are a different ethnic group that invaded from the north. However, their assertion is exactly identical to President Putin's. This is a complete fall into Putin's trap. Furthermore, even in their views on the Ainu, the Japanese government uses expressions that could be misunderstood as meaning that the Ainu are not a Japanese ethnic group. For example, in the Ainu-related measures section on the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism's website, it says, the Ainu people are considered to have been the indigenous inhabitants of Hokkaido, at least in history since the Middle Ages, in relation to the Japanese people of that time. This expression gives the misunderstanding that the Ainu are not a Japanese people. This expression quotes the report of the Experts' Roundtable on the Form of Utari Measures, issued in April 1996. In other words, this Experts' Roundtable is wrong. Left-wing political activists must have been involved in the roundtable that were merely a discussion. Also, on June 6, 2008, the resolution to recognize the Ainu people as an indigenous people was passed in the plenary sessions of the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors on the same day. This resolution calls for the Ainu people to be recognized as an indigenous people who originally inhabited the northern part of the Japanese archipelago, especially Hokkaido, and who have their own unique language, religion, and culture. This means that the Japanese government has recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people. This will bring great misfortune to Japan. Why? If Ainu is recognized as indigenous people, the United Nations will intervene. What are the indigenous peoples of other countries, such as Australia and the United States, and the organizations that support them saying? To put it in extreme terms, they are saying we should have our own constitution, our own military and our own police force. There are such radical organizations, and it is really dangerous. The indigenous peoples of the United States and Australia are a completely different race from white people. White people, a completely different race, came in, killed tens of thousands of indigenous people, and took their land. So the United Nations is intervening in this matter, demanding that it be returned and that their rights be guaranteed. However, the Ainu are people who have always lived in Japan, and throughout Japan's history. The United Nations should not be allowed to intervene in this matter. The United Nations is intervening now because the government has positioned them as indigenous people. However, it was wrong for the Japanese government to position the Ainu as indigenous people in the first place. Such expressions give the misunderstanding that the Ainu people are not Japanese. And up until now, many scholars have argued that the Ainu are a northern people and a different race from the Japanese people. The erroneous claims of these scholars have been reflected in the government's views and the Diet resolutions of the House of Representatives and the House of Councillors. Even more unfortunate, just recently, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology gave guidance that overwrites this erroneous perception. They instructed that Hokkaido was not part of Japan before the Meiji period because there were more foreign people, namely the Ainu, than Japanese people living in Hokkaido until the Edo period. In the geography textbook certification, they instructed that Hokkaido be left white, while Honshu and the rest of the country be colored. As a result, in geography textbooks, Hokkaido is no longer an inherent part of Japan's territory. If that happens, Japan will be at a great disadvantage in negotiations over the Northern Territories issue. Neither Etorofu nor Kunashiri will be an inherent part of Japan's islands. If the Ainu who lived there were Russian and not Japanese, Japan's claim will be completely destroyed. Next, I would like to talk about what should be done to prevent Hokkaido from becoming a second Ukraine. Russia has begun its invasion of Ukraine under the banner of protecting its own people. It is nothing more than a one-sided accusation that ignores historical facts and the actual situation, and completely ignores the claims of the other side. In other words, Russia does not take into consideration the claims of other countries at all, and Russia will invade other countries as long as the explanation it gives to its own people, even if it is a far-fetched one. Moreover, Russia has even made a law that allows it to intervene in Hokkaido. And Russia claims that the Ainu are a Russian ethnic group, fabricates it, and through its one-sided and unscientific understanding of the Ainu, it has begun to assert its territorial ambitions, saying that Russia has full authority over Hokkaido. If such outrageous arguments become accepted within Russia, Russia will begin to assert its sovereignty over Hokkaido even more vociferously. If that happens, Russia will be justified in invading Hokkaido. This is the same structure as the invasion of Ukraine. Let's not make this happen. To do so, we need to fully understand the truth that is supported by science. The Ainu are the descendants of the Jomon people, and therefore the Japanese people, and Ainu is the oldest inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago. Since the dawn of history, only Japanese people have lived in Hokkaido and the Kuril Islands, and there have been no ethnic problems there. On the contrary, the Jomon people of the Japanese archipelago advanced into the eastern Eurasian continent. Archaeological surveys have shown that there are no Homo sapiens remains in eastern Eurasia, including Siberia, that are older than those in Japan. Ancient peoples certainly left the Japanese archipelago and began living in Siberia. Consequently, by applying Putin's logic, Siberia is Japan's territory. The Ainu used to be called Ebisu. Later, around the Kamakura period in the 12th century, they began to be called Ezo. They have coexisted and traded each other with the people of central governments in Kyoto, Kamakura and Edo. The Ainu have prospered greatly by selling furs and seafood from the northern seas to them. The central government and the Ainu have formed two inseparable sides of Japanese history. There is no room for Russia to interfere in this. Therefore, the Japanese people must never go along with Russian efforts to divide the Japanese people, including the Ainu. Furthermore, the Japanese people must share an accurate understanding of the Ainu and unite to oppose Russia. To do this, we must not make false claims about the Ainu. Furthermore, we must never say things that would please Putin, such as saying that the Ainu are a northern people. We must not say things that would provoke Russian invasion. So today's talk has gotten a bit political, but the position of the Ainu is truly important. I hope that you all understand this. Thank you for today.
The Japan Ground Self-Defense Force has been preparing for the possibility of Russian military attacking Japanese territory in Hokkaido again. The Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force tank unit in Hokkaido remembers the exploits of the 11th Tank Regiment, which fought against the Soviet Army on Shumishu Island and caused great damage to the Soviet Army. The Act on the Promotion of Ainu Culture, and Dissemination and Enlightenment of Knowledge about Ainu Tradition, etc. New Ainu law was enacted in April 2019, but a similar law already existed. Why was this law enacted again in 2019 despite that? It was because activists wanted to receive subsidies from the government, and because they may wanted to have the Ainu clearly recognized as an indigenous people and obtain some kind of benefit from Russia. However, as Mr. Sawada asserts, the Ainu are descendants of the Jomon people and are Japanese people, and it is a historical fact that they have flourished together in the Japanese archipelago. This is a scientific fact obtained as a result of genetic analysis. Therefore, the errors in the Act on the Promotion of Ainu Culture, and Dissemination and Enlightenment of Knowledge about Ainu Tradition, etc., must be corrected soon. The purpose of the law is to solve various issues, such as promoting Ainu culture and welfare policies, as well as promoting local areas and industries. Therefore, the Japanese government must not allow Russia to use this law as an excuse to attack Hokkaido. Otherwise, Hokkaido will be attacked by Russia one day, like Ukraine, and no one will be able to stop it. This presentation by Mr. Sawada was given at a study group on the Jomon. We would like to thank Mr. Haruichi Katho, the organizer of the Jomon. What did you think of this video? Or send us an email directly. The email address is support@jomon.site. Thank you very much. Well, see you next time.